You are not here by accident. This moment is not random, and it is not the beginning of something you must struggle toward. It is the evidence of something that has already occurred. The very fact that this message reached you indicates that an older timeline, one built on contraction, repetition, and misalignment, has already collapsed beneath you. Timelines do not end with explosions. They dissolve quietly when they can no longer match who you are becoming. And you would not be able to perceive this signal unless your consciousness had already stepped out of that previous structure. This is how reality actually communicates. Not through noise, but through alignment. When an identity shift begins, the field responds by rearranging what you encounter. Certain messages appear. Certain doors close without drama. Certain struggles lose their grip. What you are experiencing right now is not persuasion. It is recognition. Another version of you, one that is no longer negotiating with fear or limitation, is already stabilized. And awareness is the bridge between you and that version. Notice the calm underneath this realization. There is no urgency here. No demand to fix yourself. No instruction to force belief. That absence of pressure is the signal. Old timelines thrive on tension and effort. They require you to push, prove, and chase. When they collapse, the nervous system expects more resistance, but instead it encounters stillness. That stillness is not emptiness. It is space. Space where a new trajectory can lock in without interference. This is important to understand now, before the mind tries to take control. You do not shift timelines by doing more. You shift by recognizing what is already true. Recognition is coherence. It tells the field, without words, this identity is real. And once that recognition stabilizes, the external world has no choice but to follow. Not because you command it, but because reality is a mirror, not an opponent. The rest of this transmission exists for one reason only, to help you remain in alignment with the timeline you have already touched. Not to convince you. Not to motivate you. But to remove the subtle habits that pull awareness back into the old pattern. You are not being asked to become someone else. You are being invited to stop interrupting what is already unfolding. Nothing has gone wrong if parts of your life still look unfinished. Collapse happens before replacement becomes visible. That gap is not failure. It is recalibration. And your presence here means you crossed the threshold where the old structure could no longer hold you. Let this be simple. Let it be calm. Let it be recognized. And if this truth resonates, anchor it now. Comment with the exact words, I shifted. Recognition stabilizes reality. Parallel selves are often imagined as distant versions of you living in alternate worlds, separated by time, space, or some dramatic cosmic event. That framing keeps them unreachable. It turns alignment into a chase. But parallel realities are not elsewhere, and they are not ahead of you. They are simultaneous identity states existing now, layered within the present moment. The only thing that separates them is frequency. And frequency is not distance. It is orientation. You are not moving through one fixed world hoping to arrive at a better one later. You are selecting from multiple realities that already exist, each corresponding to a different version of you. The thriving parallel self is not waiting for you in the future. It is available the instant your inner state matches its coherence. This is why effort fails. Effort assumes separation. Recognition dissolves it. Notice how the mind tries to locate change somewhere else. Later. After healing. After understanding. After preparation. This habit belongs to the old timeline. It was built on delay, improvement, and earning. Parallel realities do not respond to becoming worthy. They respond to being aligned. The moment alignment is present, the matching reality becomes visible, not because it arrived, but because you tuned into it. Identity is the tuning mechanism. Not personality, not history, not circumstances. Identity is the quiet sense of who you are being. When that sense shifts, the field reorganizes instantly. This is why people sometimes experience sudden changes without explanation. Nothing new was created. A different channel was selected. The thriving version of you is not more confident because their life improved. Their life improved because confidence stabilized first. They are not peaceful because conditions softened. Conditions softened because peace became normal. Cause does not move outward from events. It moves inward from state. This reverses everything you were taught. There is no journey to the parallel self. Journeys imply distance. There is only allowance. When you stop insisting that change must take time, effort, or struggle, you remove the interference that keeps timelines separated. This does not mean pretending or denying your current experience. It means releasing the assumption that what you see now defines what is possible now. The present moment is not neutral. It is responsive. It reflects identity immediately, but subtly. When you identify as someone in transition, reality mirrors instability. When you identify as someone becoming, reality mirrors delay. When you recognize yourself as someone who already belongs to a different frequency, reality adjusts without announcement. This is why recognition matters more than belief. Belief tries to convince the mind. Recognition is felt. It is a quiet internal click where something stops arguing. No fireworks. No declarations. Just a subtle settling. That settling is alignment. You do not need to visualize another life. You do not need to imagine another you. You only need to notice the version of you that feels calm, steady, and unforced. That is not a fantasy. That is a parallel self brushing against awareness. Parallel realities are not reached by movement. They are revealed by stillness. When you stop reaching, you arrive. Action has been glorified as the engine of change, but action has never been the source. It is the echo. Reality does not reorganize itself because you move more, try harder, or apply pressure. It reorganizes when identity is acknowledged. Recognition comes first. Action follows naturally, or not at all, depending on what the moment requires. This is why so much effort produces so little change. Effort attempts to force reality without first shifting the state that reality is responding to. Recognition is not positive thinking. It is not convincing the mind of something it does not yet feel safe to accept. Recognition is quieter than that. It is the moment you stop arguing with what you already know internally. When recognition occurs, the field receives a clear signal. Not a request. Not a demand. A confirmation. This is who I am now. And the field, which mirrors identity with precision, begins to rearrange itself accordingly. This is where most people get stuck. They attempt to act their way into a new identity instead of recognizing the identity that is already available. They perform habits, repeat affirmations, visualize outcomes, and wait for proof before allowing themselves to feel aligned. But proof never comes first. Recognition does. The external world always lags behind the internal state. Always. When recognition stabilizes, action becomes obvious and effortless. It no longer feels like discipline or motivation. It feels like coherence. The right decisions arise without debate. The unnecessary ones fall away without resistance. This is not because you became more powerful. It is because you stopped creating friction. The field responds to clarity. When identity is unclear, reality reflects confusion. When identity is split between who you were and who you are becoming, reality mirrors delay. But when recognition lands fully, when you internally accept a new orientation without conditions, the field reorganizes fast. Often faster than the mind can track. This is why forcing action often backfires. Forced action carries the frequency of doubt. It implies that something is missing. That implication is what the field responds to, not the action itself. Recognition carries completeness. It implies arrival. An arrival is magnetic. You do not need to do something to prove alignment. You notice alignment, and doing adjusts automatically. This is the reversal that changes everything. The moment you stop trying to make the shift happen, the shift gains stability. Pay attention to how the body responds when this lands. There is less tension. Less urgency. Less internal negotiation. That physiological response is recognition settling in. The nervous system no longer prepares for struggle. It allows. This chapter closes the initiation for a reason. Once recognition is understood, the chase ends. You stop looking for the missing step and start noticing what is already moving. If this resonates, acknowledge it physically. Hit the like button now, not as a request, but as a signal of resonance. A simple confirmation that recognition has occurred. The field responds to clarity. A timeline is not a series of events unfolding one after another. That interpretation comes from linear thinking, and linear thinking cannot explain why the same patterns repeat in different forms, or why sudden shifts occur without logical cause. A timeline is a sustained emotional frequency. It is a pattern of inner states that remains consistent long enough for reality to organize around it. Events are not the cause. They are the evidence. Emotion is the language the field understands. Not words. Not intentions. Not plans. Emotion carries instruction. It tells reality what to reflect back. When an emotional state becomes familiar, when it is returned to again and again, it solidifies into a trajectory. That trajectory is what you experience as a timeline. Change the events without changing the emotional frequency, and the timeline persists. Change the frequency, and the events reorganize automatically. This is why people feel like they are reliving the same year in different costumes. Different jobs, different relationships, different locations, but the same emotional undertone. The field is not responding to circumstance. It is responding to state. As long as the state remains unchanged, the timeline does too. Emotion does not mean intensity. It means orientation. Subtle emotions are often more powerful than dramatic ones because they are sustained. A quiet sense of lack will generate more limitation than a moment of fear. A low-level expectation of disappointment will quietly shape outcomes without being noticed. The field mirrors what is consistent, not what is loud. This is also why trying to change circumstances directly is exhausting. You are attempting to override a frequency with force. Force creates resistance. Resistance feeds the same emotional pattern you are trying to escape. The field receives mixed signals and defaults to the dominant one, which is usually the familiar state. Timelines shift when emotional identity shifts. Not when emotions are suppressed or bypassed, but when they are allowed to recalibrate. Relief is a frequency. Neutrality is a frequency. Calm is a frequency. These states may seem passive, but they are powerful because they interrupt old instructions. They tell the field something has changed. Notice how different emotional states produce different perceptions of the same situation. The world looks different when you are calm than when you are anxious, even if nothing externally changed. That difference is not imaginary. It is a preview of a different timeline. Perception adjusts first. Circumstances follow. This is why emotional awareness matters more than mental control. Thoughts fluctuate. Emotions stabilize. The field listens to what you consistently feel, not what you occasionally think. When emotional coherence increases, reality simplifies. Fewer obstacles appear. Less effort is required. This is not luck. It is alignment. You are not here to manage events. You are here to maintain frequency. When frequency changes, events must reorganize. They have no choice. This is not philosophy. It is mechanics. Once you understand this, you stop asking when things will happen. You start noticing how you are being. And timelines respond immediately to that shift. Identity is not a label you wear. It is the anchor point from which reality organizes itself around you. The field does not respond to what you want, hope for, or think about occasionally. It responds to who you consistently recognize yourself as being. That recognition stabilizes a timeline. Without it, experiences drift, repeat, and loop. This is why wanting alone never produces lasting change. Wanting implies separation. It implies that what you desire exists somewhere outside of who you are now. That implication is not neutral. It is an instruction. The field receives it as not yet, not mine, not now. And so it mirrors that state with delay, almosts, and cycles that never quite resolve. Identity does not chase outcomes. It assumes them. Not arrogantly. Quietly. Naturally. When identity shifts, behavior does not need to be forced. Choices align on their own. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop rehearsing futures. You stop measuring progress. The field senses coherence and locks the timeline in place. Many people attempt to upgrade their lives while keeping the same self-concept. They change environments, relationships, routines, even beliefs, but the inner reference point remains unchanged. The result is familiar. Initial excitement, followed by subtle regression. The timeline snaps back because the anchor never moved. Identity is not something you create through effort. It is something you allow through recognition. When you recognize yourself as someone who belongs in a certain frequency, reality treats that as fact. Not because you declared it, but because you stopped contradicting it internally. Looping experiences are not punishment. They are feedback. They show you where identity has remained fixed despite new desires. When the same themes repeat, the field is saying this is still who you believe you are. Not consciously. Emotionally. Energetically. This is why becoming matters more than manifesting. Manifestation is a side effect. Identity is the cause. When identity shifts, manifestations follow in the most efficient way possible, often bypassing the scenarios you thought were required. The field does not need your plan. It needs your coherence. Notice how relieving it feels to stop wanting and start allowing. That relief is alignment. It signals that the anchor is loosening from the old timeline. As identity stabilizes in a new frequency, the old experiences lose relevance. They no longer match who you are being, so they fall away without confrontation. Remaining in a frequency is a choice, not a struggle. It is reinforced by what you consistently expose yourself to, not by what you occasionally understand. If you feel the resonance here, make that choice consciously. Subscribe now as a declaration of staying within this frequency, not for information, but for coherence. Identity is stabilized through consistency. The idea of waiting is one of the most persistent illusions of the old timeline. Waiting assumes that alignment happens later, after conditions improve, after understanding deepens, after something external changes. But timelines do not open in the future. They are accessed now, or not at all. The present moment is not a checkpoint on the way to change. It is the only doorway. Future orientation feels productive, but energetically it is a delay signal. It tells the field that fulfillment exists somewhere else. That instruction is received clearly. And so reality continues to reflect preparation instead of arrival. This is why people can spend years getting ready to shift without ever shifting. They are rehearsing a future that never becomes present. Presence is not passive. It is precise. When you are fully present, identity stabilizes. There is no projection, no anticipation, no mental bargaining. The field responds immediately to that coherence because there is no contradiction in the signal. This is why real shifts often feel sudden. Not because they happen fast, but because resistance stopped. Preparation belongs to the mind. Coherence belongs to the field. You do not prepare your way into a new timeline. You allow your state to settle now, and the timeline adjusts around that state. The moment you stop asking when and start noticing how you are being, access opens. This does not mean ignoring practical considerations or pretending circumstances do not exist. It means understanding that circumstances are downstream. They cannot lead. When you try to solve the future from the present, you reinforce the idea that the present is insufficient. That idea becomes the dominant frequency. The present moment is powerful because it is the only moment where identity can be experienced directly. Past and future are concepts. Identity is lived now. And since timelines are anchored to identity, the shift must occur here. There is nowhere else it could happen. Notice how often the mind postpones permission. Permission to feel calm. Permission to feel grounded. Permission to feel aligned. These are not rewards for progress. They are entry points. When you allow them now, without justification, you signal arrival. The field responds to arrival with opportunity, not effort. Delay is not caused by lack of readiness. It is caused by refusal to settle. Settling feels unfamiliar at first because old timelines are built on motion and tension. But when you allow stillness, even briefly, you interrupt the old signal. That interruption is enough to redirect trajectory. You do not need to wait for certainty to be present. Presence creates certainty. You do not need to know how things will unfold. Knowing is not required. Coherence is. Every time you return attention to now, without trying to get somewhere else, you reinforce the new timeline. This is not a practice. It is a choice. And it is always available. There is no later where alignment becomes possible. There is only now, where it already is. When a shift begins, it does not announce itself with certainty. It arrives quietly, as relief, as space, as the absence of struggle. And this is precisely when the analytical mind intervenes. Not to help, but to regain control. Analysis is the old timeline's last defense. It senses that its authority is dissolving, and it responds by questioning, measuring, and checking. The mind asks, is this real? Am I doing this right? What if I lose it? What if nothing happens? These questions feel responsible, even intelligent, but energetically they do one thing only. They reintroduce doubt. And doubt is not neutral. Doubt is an instruction to revert. Overanalyzing a shift pulls attention out of the body and back into projection. Instead of inhabiting the new state, awareness starts observing it, testing it, trying to verify it. This creates separation. And separation is the signature of the old timeline. The moment you step outside the experience to examine it, you weaken coherence. The analytical mind is useful for problem solving within a stable structure. But a timeline shift is not a problem to be solved. It is a state to be allowed. Analysis implies something is unfinished or uncertain. That implication is received by the field as instability. The field responds by restoring what is familiar. This is why people feel like they almost shifted. Because they did. But then they checked. They monitored. They looked for confirmation. And in doing so, they reactivated the identity that needs proof before allowing alignment. That identity belongs to the previous trajectory. Constant checking is a form of control. It is the attempt to manage an unfolding that does not require management. When you check for results, you imply absence. When you look for signs, you imply doubt. When you ask if it is working, you imply that it might not be. The field mirrors the implication, not the intention. The shift itself does not need understanding. Understanding comes later, if at all. The moment you try to explain the shift while it is stabilizing, you interrupt it. This is why the most stable transformations often occur without narration. They are lived first. Interpreted later. Notice how the body responds when you stop checking. There is a softening. A settling. That settling is the new timeline anchoring. The mind resists this because it equates stillness with danger. But stillness is coherence. And coherence is safety at the level of the field. This does not mean suppressing thought. It means not obeying it. Thoughts can arise without being followed. Analysis can occur without being indulged. The difference is subtle but critical. You let the shift happen without commentary. The old timeline survives through vigilance. The new one stabilizes through allowance. When you stop monitoring the shift, it completes itself. When you stop questioning alignment, it deepens. Let the mind relax its grip. The shift does not need supervision. It needs space. Even when an old timeline is painful, it is familiar. And familiarity carries its own gravity. Emotional nostalgia is not about missing the circumstances of the past. It is about returning to an identity that the nervous system recognizes. The body does not initially seek alignment. It seeks predictability. And predictability often lives in patterns that no longer serve you. This is why people leave suffering and then circle back to it. Not because they failed, but because the unfamiliar calm of a new timeline can feel unsafe. Peace can feel empty when the system is used to tension. Ease can feel suspicious when effort was once required to survive. The old emotional identity whispers, "At least here I know who I am." Emotional nostalgia does not announce itself clearly. It hides behind thoughts like, "Things felt more real before," or "I was more motivated then," or "I don't feel like myself anymore." What is actually happening is an identity withdrawal. The old self is losing relevance, and the system reaches for it out of habit. Painful emotions often feel grounding because they are dense. They give shape and texture to experience. When those emotions dissolve, there can be a sense of floating. That floating is not loss. It is transition. But the mind interprets it as instability and pulls awareness back toward what feels solid, even if that solidity is suffering. This is why people recreate problems right after resolving them. Not consciously. Energetically. The identity that knew how to operate within struggle suddenly has no role. Rather than allowing a new identity to emerge, the system resurrects the old one to restore a sense of self. Emotional nostalgia is especially strong during early alignment because the new timeline has not yet fully populated with reference points. There is less drama, less friction, less emotional charge. To an untrained nervous system, this can feel like something is missing. The old self equates intensity with aliveness. But intensity is not truth. It is conditioning. The absence of familiar struggle does not mean stagnation. It means the signal has changed. The field is no longer responding to the old emotional instructions, so the old reflections disappear. This can feel disorienting before it feels freeing. Returning to the old emotional identity may temporarily feel comforting, but it reactivates the old timeline completely. The same patterns reappear, often faster than before, because the field responds efficiently to familiar signals. This is not punishment. It is precision. The way through emotional nostalgia is not resistance. It is understanding. You do not shame the pullback. You recognize it. You allow the unfamiliar calm to exist without labeling it as emptiness. You give the system time to learn a new baseline. Identity does not vanish instantly. It fades as relevance fades. When you stop feeding the old emotional patterns with attention and meaning, they lose coherence. The new timeline stabilizes not through force, but through patience. You are not losing yourself. You are releasing a version of you that needed pain to feel real. The discomfort of letting go is temporary. The freedom that follows is not. When a timeline shift begins, there is a natural impulse to explain it. To name it. To have it witnessed. This impulse feels harmless, even healthy, but it often becomes a leak. Trying to convince others of what you are experiencing pulls energy outward at the exact moment it needs to stabilize inward. Validation seeking weakens coherence because it divides identity. People anchored in the old timeline cannot see what you see, not because they are wrong, but because they are tuned to a different frequency. When you try to bring them with you through explanation, you temporarily tune yourself back to their signal. The field does not respond to what you intend to show. It responds to the frequency you are matching in that moment. Convincing is effort. And effort implies uncertainty. When you explain yourself repeatedly, you reinforce the idea that something must be proven. That implication travels directly into the field. The result is subtle destabilization. The shift feels less solid. Doubt creeps in. Old patterns resurface. Silence is not secrecy. It is containment. Containment allows a new identity to settle without interference. Think of it as letting something crystallize. If you disturb it too soon, it returns to fluid form. A timeline shift is no different. It requires stillness to harden. This is especially important early on, when the new frequency has not yet fully integrated into the body. External opinions act like noise. Even supportive ones can pull you into explanation mode, which reactivates the observing self rather than the being self. Observation fragments presence. You do not owe anyone clarity while you are stabilizing. Clarity comes after coherence, not before. When the shift has integrated, explanation becomes unnecessary. Your state communicates without words. People notice the difference without being told. This is how alignment spreads naturally, without force. The old timeline survives through consensus. It is reinforced socially, emotionally, and energetically. When you seek agreement from those still inside it, you momentarily step back into its structure. This does not mean cutting people off. It means not requiring them to understand. Containment is an act of self-trust. It says, I do not need permission to be aligned. Silence here is not withdrawal. It is focus. It is allowing the field to recalibrate around a stable signal instead of a fluctuating one. Internal stabilization happens when identity is no longer negotiated externally. When you stop checking how your experience lands with others, it settles more deeply within you. The shift becomes yours, not something you are trying to defend or explain. There will be a time to speak, if speaking is needed at all. But that time comes after the timeline has locked in. Until then, let your experience be private. Let the coherence strengthen. The field responds most powerfully when the signal is uninterrupted. Allowing is not doing nothing. It is removing interference. It is the conscious decision to stop steering a process that already knows where it is going. The field reorganizes naturally around identity when it is not being corrected, rushed, or controlled. Control is the old timeline's reflex. Allowing is the new one's stabilizer. Most interference happens subtly. It looks like monitoring progress. It sounds like asking if it is working. It feels like adjusting yourself to get a better result. None of this is neutral. Each adjustment sends the message that the current state is insufficient. That message is received clearly by the field and mirrored as delay or instability. Allowing begins when you stop managing alignment. Alignment is not fragile. It does not need supervision. It weakens only when it is questioned. The moment you relax the need to guide the outcome, coherence deepens on its own. This is not faith. It is mechanics. Systems stabilize when they are not constantly disrupted. The allowing technique is simple, but the mind resists it because it removes the sense of control. The mind believes it must participate for things to work. But the mind is not the organizer of reality. It is a navigator within it. When it steps back, the field takes over. Allowing looks like letting emotional states settle without labeling them. It looks like noticing impulses without acting on them immediately. It looks like choosing not to react to temporary fluctuations. This is not suppression. It is trust. Trust that coherence does not disappear when you stop checking on it. The new identity you are stabilizing does not force outcomes. It expects alignment. Expectation is quieter than desire. Desire reaches. Expectation rests. When expectation replaces effort, the field receives a stable signal instead of a fluctuating one. Steering creates resistance because it assumes something is off course. Allowing assumes the opposite. It assumes the course is correcting itself. That assumption becomes the dominant instruction. The field responds by smoothing transitions, removing unnecessary obstacles, and presenting solutions without struggle. You may notice that when you allow, things move in unexpected ways. Paths open that were not planned. Certain efforts become irrelevant. This is not randomness. It is efficiency. The field does not need your strategy. It needs your coherence. Allowing does not mean disengaging from life. It means engaging without manipulation. You still act, but action arises from clarity, not urgency. You still decide, but decisions feel obvious, not heavy. This is how you know allowing is working. There is less internal debate. The moment you feel the urge to take control, pause. That pause is the technique. In that pause, the old timeline loses momentum. The new one gains stability. You do not replace control with passivity. You replace it with presence. When you stop steering the field reveals that it was always responding. You simply stopped interrupting it. Affirmations attempt to overwrite reality with language. Emotional calibration adjusts the signal that reality is actually responding to. Words can be repeated without effect if the emotional state underneath them remains unchanged. The field does not listen to what you say. It listens to what you sustain. This is why affirmations often feel hollow or exhausting. They require effort. Effort implies resistance. Resistance carries its own frequency, and that frequency contradicts the statement being repeated. The result is internal conflict. The mind says one thing. The body feels another. The field mirrors the body. Emotional calibration works because it does not fight the current state. It acknowledges it and gently shifts orientation. You do not jump from fear to confidence. You move from tension to relief. From urgency to neutrality. From contraction to calm. These shifts are subtle, but they are stable. Stability is what the field responds to. Relief is one of the most powerful calibrators. It signals that something has resolved, even if circumstances have not yet changed. Neutrality is equally potent. It removes resistance without demanding positivity. Calm anchors both. Together, they create coherence without strain. The mistake many people make is trying to feel emotions they believe will produce results. This turns emotion into performance. Performance creates pressure. Pressure recreates the old timeline. Calibration is not about manufacturing feelings. It is about allowing the next lighter state to emerge naturally. Notice that relief does not require belief. You can feel relief without knowing how things will work out. You can feel neutral without being certain. You can feel calm without having answers. These states do not depend on outcomes. They are available now. That is why they are effective. When emotional calibration is practiced, thoughts begin to soften on their own. The mind follows the body. Clarity emerges without being forced. Decisions feel simpler. The field receives a consistent signal instead of fluctuating commands. Calibration also prevents emotional suppression. You are not pushing feelings away. You are letting them resolve. When emotions are allowed to move toward relief, they complete their cycle. Suppressed emotions linger. Calibrated emotions dissolve. The goal is not to be positive. Positivity can be another form of resistance if it is forced. The goal is coherence. Coherence feels steady. It feels grounded. It does not require constant maintenance. Once established, it stabilizes the timeline effortlessly. You will know calibration is working when you stop trying to control your inner state. When you stop monitoring how you feel. When calm becomes the baseline instead of a temporary achievement. At that point, affirmations become unnecessary. The field already knows what you are aligned with. Emotion is instruction. Calibrate it gently, and reality follows without argument. Acting as if has been misunderstood because it has been treated as performance. Performance is effortful. It requires pretending, monitoring, and maintaining an image. Embodiment is different. Embodiment is permission. It is the quiet allowance for identity to express itself without asking for approval. When people try to act as if, they often exaggerate. They adopt behaviors that do not feel natural yet. They force confidence, suppress doubt, and imitate what they think the aligned version of themselves would do. This creates tension. Tension signals inauthenticity. The field responds to that tension by resisting the shift. True embodiment does not look dramatic. It looks subtle. It shows up as fewer explanations. As cleaner decisions. As a reduced need to justify yourself. These are not strategies. They are side effects of identity settling. You do not wake up one day and start behaving like a different person. You stop interrupting the behaviors that were already waiting underneath fear and habit. Acting as if is not about adding something. It is about removing the brakes. Permission is the key. When you internally give yourself permission to belong in a different frequency, behavior adjusts without instruction. You speak when it feels natural and remain silent when it does not. You choose differently, not because you are trying to align, but because alignment is already present. Pretending requires vigilance. Embodiment requires trust. Trust that you do not need to convince anyone, including yourself. The moment you stop checking whether you are doing it right, you are doing it right. Coherence replaces performance. Identity expresses itself through small shifts first. Posture changes. Tone softens. Boundaries clarify. These changes often go unnoticed by the one experiencing them because they do not feel like effort. They feel like relief. The field recognizes these signals immediately. This is why forcing behavior backfires. Forced behavior carries the emotional signature of not enough. Natural behavior carries the signature of alignment. The field responds to the signature, not the action itself. Acting as if without pretending means responding honestly from the state you are in now, not the state you are trying to reach. If calm is present, let calm guide action. If neutrality is present, let neutrality choose. There is no need to rush ahead of your own coherence. Over time, these small permissions accumulate. The identity stabilizes. The timeline locks. There is no moment where you feel like you crossed a finish line. You simply notice that old behaviors no longer make sense. Embodiment is not a role you play. It is a frequency you allow. When you stop trying to look aligned and start letting alignment move you, acting as if becomes effortless. Ease is rarely recognized as progress because it does not look impressive to the conditioned mind. The old timeline trained you to expect struggle before reward, tension before movement, urgency before results. So when alignment begins and those signals fade, the mind assumes something has stalled. In reality, ease is the first indicator that a new timeline has been selected. Before circumstances change, pressure dissolves. Before manifestations appear, urgency weakens. This is not coincidence. It is sequence. When identity stabilizes, the nervous system exits survival mode. That exit feels like calm, clarity, and a reduction in compulsive effort. These are not side effects. They are confirmation. The mind wants proof in the form of events. It wants something visible to point to. But timelines do not announce themselves externally at first. They announce themselves internally. Ease is the internal signature of alignment. It signals that resistance has dropped and the field is no longer being contradicted. This is why chasing manifestations often delays them. Chasing implies absence. It implies that something must arrive to make alignment real. Ease implies arrival already happened. The field responds to arrival with efficiency. It responds to chasing with distance. Clarity is another early indicator. Not clarity about the future, but clarity about what no longer fits. Decisions simplify. Certain options lose appeal without debate. This pruning happens before expansion. The field removes what is incompatible with the new frequency first. That removal often feels quiet, even anticlimactic. Reduced urgency can be unsettling if you are used to pushing. The absence of pressure may be misread as loss of motivation. But motivation rooted in tension belongs to the old timeline. In alignment, movement comes from coherence, not fear. It feels slower, but it is more precise. Dramatic external proof usually comes later, if at all. Sometimes the most profound shifts never look dramatic from the outside. They look like stability. They look like consistency. They look like a life that no longer requires constant management. The expectation of fireworks is a leftover belief from effort-based creation. It assumes that big change must feel intense. But intensity is not a requirement for transformation. In fact, intensity often signals resistance. Ease signals flow. If you are experiencing more calm than excitement, more groundedness than anticipation, more simplicity than momentum, do not correct it. Do not assume you are doing something wrong. These are signs that the old timeline has lost traction. The field reorganizes quietly when not being watched. When you stop waiting for proof, proof arrives naturally. When you stop measuring progress, progress accelerates. Ease is not the end result. It is the doorway. Walk through it without questioning why it is open. Aligned timelines do not arrive with urgency. They do not demand immediate action or announce themselves with pressure. They introduce themselves quietly, through small openings that feel natural rather than dramatic. This often confuses the mind, which has been conditioned to associate opportunity with intensity. But intensity belongs to force. Alignment belongs to subtlety. When the field responds to coherence, it does so efficiently. It does not create chaos to get your attention. It offers invitations. These invitations often appear ordinary. A conversation that feels slightly different. An idea that lands without excitement but carries clarity. A decision that feels obvious instead of thrilling. The mind may overlook these moments because they lack spectacle, but they are precise. Quiet opportunities require presence to be noticed. They do not pull you forward with urgency. They wait for recognition. This is intentional. A timeline that matches your identity does not need to persuade you. It assumes compatibility. When you are aligned, the correct path feels simple, not heroic. Forceful breakthroughs belong to misalignment. They are attempts to break through resistance rather than move with flow. When people chase dramatic change, they often bypass the subtle opening that was already available. The field does not reward force. It responds to resonance. Gentle impulses are one of the clearest signs of alignment. They do not come with overthinking or emotional charge. They arrive as a quiet knowing. Act on them without justification. These impulses do not need analysis. Analysis reintroduces delay. When an impulse is aligned, it carries its own momentum. Opportunities that arrive quietly often challenge old definitions of success. They may look smaller than expected. Less impressive. Less validating. But they are scalable. They expand naturally because they are not built on resistance. Loud opportunities often collapse under pressure. Quiet ones stabilize. This is why patience matters. Not waiting, but allowing. Allowing the field to reveal itself without demanding proof. The more you trust subtle movement, the more subtle movement increases. The field responds to what you notice. Do not dismiss an opportunity because it feels easy. Ease is not a sign of insignificance. It is a sign of compatibility. When something fits your frequency, it does not need to fight its way in. Aligned timelines refine your perception. You become more sensitive to what resonates and less interested in what impresses. This shift is critical. It keeps you from chasing noise and missing signal. If you are waiting for a dramatic moment to confirm alignment, you may overlook the door already open. Quiet opportunities do not announce themselves twice. They assume readiness. Listen closely. The field is already speaking. Power has been misdefined by the old timeline. It was framed as intensity, dominance, reaction, and force. It rewarded those who moved fast, spoke loud, and pushed hard. But alignment does not amplify reactivity. It dissolves it. As timelines shift, power does not increase as aggression. It stabilizes as presence. When identity aligns, the nervous system no longer scans constantly for threat or opportunity. This alone changes everything. Reactivity fades because there is nothing to defend and nothing to chase. Situations that once provoked urgency now pass through without hook. This is not indifference. It is sovereignty. The mind often misinterprets this shift. It assumes that less reaction means less drive, less passion, less influence. But the opposite is true. Reactivity scatters energy. Stability concentrates it. When you are no longer pulled by every stimulus, your signal becomes clear. The field responds to clarity with responsiveness. Aligned power is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not argue. It does not need to prove anything. It rests in certainty rather than performance. This is why truly aligned people often appear calm in situations that unsettle others. They are not suppressing reaction. They are simply not triggered. Presence replaces force. Instead of trying to control outcomes, you influence them by how steadily you hold your state. This is not passive. It is precise. Presence shapes reality without friction because it does not introduce resistance. The belief that power must feel intense comes from survival conditioning. In survival, intensity keeps you alert. But alignment is not survival. It is coherence. Coherence feels grounded, not charged. It feels steady, not sharp. The body recognizes it as safe. As reactivity decreases, discernment increases. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of defend. This changes interactions immediately. Conflicts soften. Boundaries become clearer without being aggressive. The field mirrors this by reducing unnecessary friction. Many people abandon alignment here because they mistake calm for weakness. They believe something is missing. But nothing is missing. Something has resolved. The need to react has dissolved because identity no longer feels threatened by external movement. This is real power. Not the power to dominate circumstances, but the power to remain unchanged by them. When you stop being moved by everything, everything begins to move differently around you. Aligned power does not escalate. It stabilizes. And in that stability, the timeline locks in. When a new timeline begins to stabilize, resistance often appears not in the mind, but in the body. This surprises people. They assume that if something is positive, expansive, or aligned, it should feel immediately comfortable. But the nervous system does not respond to positivity. It responds to familiarity. And familiarity is built through repetition, not truth. The nervous system's primary function is not happiness. It is safety. Safety is defined by what is known, not by what is beneficial. This is why even painful patterns can feel grounding. They are predictable. When those patterns dissolve and are replaced by ease, stability, or calm, the nervous system may interpret the change as a threat. This is where many shifts are abandoned. Not because they were wrong, but because the body resisted the unfamiliar quiet. The absence of tension can feel like emptiness. The absence of struggle can feel like loss of control. The old timeline trained the body to stay alert, to brace, to anticipate. Alignment removes the reason for that vigilance, but the body does not adjust instantly. This reaction is not failure. It is integration. The nervous system needs time to learn a new baseline. Just as it once adapted to stress, it must now adapt to safety. That adaptation requires gentleness, not correction. When people try to override this process, they often push themselves back into familiar stress just to feel normal again. Gentleness is not indulgence. It is regulation. When you move slowly, breathe deeply, and allow pauses, you signal to the nervous system that the new state is safe. Over time, calm becomes familiar. Ease becomes trustworthy. Stability becomes home. This is why forcing momentum during integration is counterproductive. Speed triggers survival responses. Pressure recreates old patterns. The body tightens, the mind searches for problems, and the old timeline regains coherence. Nothing went wrong. The system simply reverted to what it knows. Understanding this changes how you relate to discomfort. You stop interpreting it as a sign that the shift was incorrect. You recognize it as the body recalibrating. This recognition alone reduces resistance. The nervous system relaxes when it is not being judged. Integration is not linear. There may be moments where old sensations resurface. This does not mean regression. It means the system is checking for safety. Each time you respond with patience instead of panic, the new timeline stabilizes further. You are not meant to push your nervous system into alignment. You are meant to allow it to catch up. Alignment happens instantly at the level of identity, but embodiment takes time. This time is not delay. It is completion. Treat the unfamiliar calm with respect. It is not fragile. It is new. And with gentleness, it becomes permanent. There is a moment in every real shift where nothing seems to be happening. No signs. No movement. No feedback. This is the void phase, and it is where most people turn back. Not because the shift failed, but because the old timeline makes one final appeal through emptiness. The void is not absence. It is clearance. The old structures have dissolved, but the new ones have not yet fully taken form. The field is reorganizing without interference. From the outside, it looks like stagnation. From within, it can feel disorienting. The mind, trained to equate motion with progress, interprets this pause as failure. This is the most critical misunderstanding. When nothing is happening, everything is happening beneath the surface. The field is recalibrating to a new identity that no longer fits the previous patterns. Old reference points disappear. Familiar feedback loops go quiet. The mind panics because it has lost its metrics. At this point, people often try to restart motion. They reintroduce urgency. They question alignment. They reach back for familiar emotions and behaviors just to feel something again. This instantly restores the old timeline because the field responds to familiarity faster than it responds to truth. The void feels uncomfortable because it strips away distraction. There is no struggle to fix, no problem to solve, no identity to defend. For the first time, there is space. And space feels threatening to an identity that was built through effort and tension. Most people abandon the shift here because they mistake silence for rejection. They believe alignment should be rewarding immediately. But stabilization comes before reward. The field must lock the new frequency in place before it can express outwardly. If you interrupt this process, you reset it. Returning to the old timeline feels relieving at first. The noise comes back. The urgency returns. The familiar emotional weight settles in. The mind relaxes because it knows how to operate there. But the cost is repetition. The same cycles resume, often with more intensity, because awareness has increased. Those who remain through the void do not do anything special. They do not force patience. They simply do not interfere. They allow the emptiness to exist without trying to fill it. This non-action is not passive. It is precise. It tells the field, I trust the process without needing proof. The void is the final collapse of the old identity. It is where you are no longer who you were, but not yet reinforced by who you are becoming. This threshold cannot be rushed. It must be crossed through allowance. If you find yourself here, do not retreat. Do not manufacture movement. Do not look for confirmation. Let the stillness do its work. This is the point where the old timeline loses its final grip. Stabilization comes after silence. Those who understand this remain. Those who do not repeat. You are not becoming someone else. Nothing new is being added to you. Nothing foreign is being installed. What is happening now is recognition. A remembering of an identity that was always present but temporarily obscured by noise, effort, and repetition. The thriving parallel self was never separate. It was simply unrecognized. Becoming implies distance. Remembering collapses it. When you remember who you are, the chase ends. The strain dissolves. You stop trying to align and realize alignment was never lost. The old timeline was not a mistake. It was contrast. It sharpened awareness. It clarified preference. But it was never meant to be permanent. This is why the shift feels quiet at the end. There is no dramatic transformation because nothing was missing. The relief you feel is not excitement. It is familiarity returning. The identity you are stabilizing now feels natural because it is natural. It does not need rehearsal. It does not require maintenance. It simply resumes its place. Remembering is different from learning. Learning accumulates information. Remembering releases interference. As interference falls away, what remains feels obvious. You do not marvel at it. You recognize it. This is how truth lands. Calmly. Without argument. The thriving version of you was never waiting in the future. It was waiting for permission. Permission to exist without justification. Permission to be steady without apology. Permission to stop negotiating with versions of reality that no longer matched your frequency. This is why effort fades at the end of the process. Effort belonged to the forgetting. Remembering requires nothing. It is a return, not an ascent. You do not climb into alignment. You settle into it. As this stabilizes, life does not become perfect. It becomes coherent. What fits stays. What does not falls away. There is less drama, less urgency, less internal conflict. Not because you mastered reality, but because you stopped resisting it. This is the completion point. Not a finish line, but a grounding. You are no longer asking who you are becoming. You are allowing who you are to lead. The field recognizes this immediately. Stability follows recognition every time. If you are here, this was meant to land. And if it landed, let it remain active. Subscribe now as a declaration of staying within this frequency. And share this with someone who needs to hear it, not to convince them, but to offer recognition when they are ready to remember too.